Hello. This is a very big topic, so I'll try and get as much in as possible. Eden Labs is celebrating its 25th year in extraction technology this year. In botanicals, many different kinds, but also cannabis. So I could stand up here and talk a lot of really deep extraction technology. But I think after you have done something for a really long time, you start to realize what's really important. Extraction technology was the catalyst for legalization, particularly in the United States, where we legalized on medical, right? Medical is the reason why we're all sitting here. Medical is the reason why there's an industry. Without extraction, it couldn't have developed. We couldn't have had a medical market. We had to have safe products in order to produce them for patients. So what I want to talk about isn't necessarily how these things are made, but why. In product development, and especially in a mission-driven company, and this industry is mission-driven, that's the question. Why? Science, politics, and social change make up what we have today. I want to start with the science. I want to end with the science. It's all about the science. We used to do a lot of different kinds of trade shows. We only go to the most elevated in education and science anymore, which is why we're here at CannaTech. It's this fantastic show. We love it. This is the Cannabinoid System, which I'm sure you all have heard of multiple times and will many, many more times before this conference is over. It's a system. Cannabis is a system. It has a body. It is made up of chemicals, just as we are. There are strains. We don't even know what's in these strains. So what we have to start talking about is the chemovar, the actual chemical makeup and profile of the plant, and how that fits into how it fits into us. So we have a chemotype with a phenotype. The phenotype is how the plant looks. We have the different strains, or the different hybrid series, sativa, indica, and hemp rhodialis. These molecules from this plant fit into our cannabinoid receptors perfectly. There is no improving this. It is what it is. It was here. We've used it for thousands and thousands of years, and we have just discovered the endocannabinoid system, 1992. Blink of an eye in medical science. And that's where we should be looking at this. This is the medicine model, the botanical medicine model, where we have a plant that has hundreds of molecules and we have dozens of possible receptors. As Narita also said, this has been used for thousands of years, and in recent history, up until the 1930s in the US, and earlier here in South Africa, where they created prohibition even earlier. I think it's really important to go back and look at the history when you're talking about product development and in this industry, where it's going, why you're doing what you're doing. Prohibition, which we are still in fully all around the world. And you know how we know this? Because all we hear is CBD and THC. We don't talk about all the other cannabinoids. We don't talk about all the other parts of the plant and how that fits in its receptors, because it's not science. That's politics. And until we fix the politics and the social ramifications of what has been done to people, then we're nowhere. So much damage has been done to people by inhibiting our access to a plant. These huge pharmaceutical companies that are still in existence, Lilly, Park Davis and Company, Upjohn. In the 30s, Upjohn had 30 different cannabis products. Eli Lilly had 27, and Abbott Industries had 4. But Abbott Industries is the only company that is currently still working with cannabis. They have a research division called AbbVie. They made Meryl. That didn't work out so well. It does what it does, but it's not as good as the plant. This is the modern pharmaceutical science. One pill, no diversity, to treat millions of people and their DNA diversity. If you're up on your current pharmaceutical science, you will know that they have started treating people individually for toxicity, side effects, and other horrible things that a lot of pharmaceutical drugs do. Why? Because back in 1805, Frederick Sorturner took the first molecule out of a plant. You know what it was? Morphine. That's been a huge success all around the world with the opiate crisis. Doctors used to have to be able to take botany to get their medical degrees. They don't anymore. Fortunately, outside of Israel, there's also the Pacific Northwest in Washington, the United States. We're very nerdy pot people there, very, very nerdy. There are multiple companies and brands there who are promoting the minor cannabinoids. I wouldn't really consider high CBG a minor cannabinoid at all, but how often do you hear about that? There are companies out there who are branding their companies, making and creating products based on the science and where this industry is going to go. And instead of saying 80% indica, 20% sativa, they actually put the actual tested components of what is in that product on the label, including the terpene profile. Because as we all know, the terpene profile is exceedingly important in experience. Okay, now we're going to get into the extraction process a little bit. Growing, processing, and production into the end product is all one thing. It's not separate, or it shouldn't be. You take a plant, and through processing, you pull out major or less components of that plant, because every single molecule has its own boiling point. So you can grow for a particular component and then also extract for it. So you start weighing that genotype and that chemovar for an end product. What is important when you start doing extraction or processing is to make sure that the system that you have can produce as many end products as possible. Makes sense. It's a huge CapEx expense. So you want to get the most out of it. So how many products can that one system make? And then you need to thoroughly understand the efficiencies involved in that. And then you need to plan for the pivot, because there's going to be a pivot. We are going to leave talk of just CBD and THC behind at some point, and it's going to be all about the cannabinoids, all the minor cannabinoids, the terpene profiles, all of it. So you need to be ready and be thinking about that, because it's the science. It's not politics. One of the best ways to do an extraction is with CO2, because you can run a CO2 system at subcritical, which is cold, low pressure, or supercritical, higher pressure, higher temperature, and you get an entire array of products from this. Really high terpene profile on the lower end, and then faster extractions at the higher end. Just so that we're also clear, I just want to run through these really quick. An isolate, because I know you're hearing these terms. I'm sure many of you know what this is, but some of them don't. Isolate, single molecule product. It creates a pure separation. There's nothing else in it. A distillate, it's a concentration of an extraction. It separates the cannabinoids from other components in the plant, but it is not a pure separation. You do this with short path, thin film, and white film equipment after the extraction process. Distillation is taking water out of ethanol, basically, which you would be doing an extraction process with. And then the current terms for a product is full spectrum, which currently is whole plant. It means everything's in there. The extraction process has tried to replicate the chemovar. And then you have broad spectrum. This is the political one, because it's everything except THC. And in some cases, THCA, which is ridiculous because the whole reason they supposedly don't like THC is because it gets the children high. When THC doesn't get anybody high, it is just medically beneficial. But since it has a THC in it, it's bad. So no broad spectrum. Post-processing is where your product will be made or unmade. It is imperative at starting off in the industry and starting off in that you automatically just start building out for GMP. And if you're going to be going to pharmaceutical, you need to be looking at an ISO certification. There are specialists for this because GMP stands for get more paper. And you need an expert to help you get all that paper. The post-processing requires more additional equipment, specialized equipment, solvent storage, increased overhead. But again, if you want to do a purification product at the end, this is equipment that you're going to need to know what it is and prepare for that expense and the overhead. What's easier is just to grow for the product and keep all those minor cannabinoids in there if possible. Now, obviously, the market currently just wants CBD, and that's fine. We knew back in 2010 when CBD started getting talked about all the time that eventually we would figure out that you needed all the minor cannabinoids too. The world hasn't quite figured that out in general. But my introduction to that theory was a few years ago, actually at CannaTech in Israel, where I was able to go visit Tikkun Olam, where they had been doing trials for quite some time, and they discovered that there is a bell curve with CBD medically, where it's effective, and then the efficacy starts to drop and fall off, and you can give people more CBD, but it doesn't help. So what they discovered is if you add back in the minor cannabinoids, it stabilizes and increases the efficacy. So everybody's going to figure this out eventually. But in the meantime, scientifically, we can do a lot with genetic splicing and manipulation, and this plant is so susceptible to how it's grown, where it's grown, the temperature. One side of a greenhouse room could have a different chemical profile than the other side, just because of the different sunlight that it gets. But as Nurit was talking about, these things can be standardized. Ethanol is a fantastic extraction methodology. It is an exhaustive extraction. It will pull everything out of there. If you run it cold, it will run selectively, and it will actually retain a fairly good terpene profile. Hemp will require large CO2 plants. There is so much biomass you have to put through. And it's kind of sad what's happening too with hemp, because it is pushing out all of the small farmers. And this is part of the reason. You have to have so much biomass to make an end product. And to do that, you have to have a lot of CapEx to be able to do this. But it is the most efficient way to do it. Hops industry uses CO2 to do tons a day, and hemp will too. Utilizing both methodologies is what a lot of our clients do, is efficiency expansion and multi-phase extraction. So you run the CO2, the plant material in the CO2 to capture the terpenes, and it actually shortens the extraction time, because CO2 can also be a longer extraction time. And then you pull the material and run the rest of it through ethanol. And that gives you a wide SKU range. And it also cuts the extraction process down tremendously. There are benefits to this as well. You want to try and replicate the chemobar as much as possible. And this helps you have more control over chemobar drift. You rely also on the tunability of these methodologies. And you get a whole plant, full spectrum product. Aside from pharmaceutical and recreational, which it's not recreational, it's a lifestyle choice. It's conscious consumption. It's people who are deciding not to drink anymore, or they're deciding not to take opiates anymore. It is a conscious decision. So it is not recreational. I wish we would never hear that word ever again, because it just gives this fallacy of what's actually really happening. What I would really love to see is, because cannabis and the natural products industries are both hockey stick industries, and they developed around the same time in the 90s. And they need to marry. And then we create a phytoceutical solution, which means we can get to have people having access to the plant and to this medicine far sooner than if we have to do a clinical trial on every single molecule in this plant. That will take forever. In the meantime, people are suffering and dying because they don't have access. This industry is built on empathy and ethics. It is here to cure social ills and medical ills. The very first push for all of this to get going was children with epilepsy. And that has driven this industry, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. This is a medical solution. And it's a health and well-being solution because it's preventative medicine. This is a possibility of completely changing our medical system and the prison industrial complex. It is criminal that this is criminal. And I love this quote from Tesla. It keeps it all in perspective. Science is but a perversion of itself unless it has as at its ultimate goal the betterment of humanity. If you're just playing around because you can, then you're playing around with how, not why. So before developing product, ask why. What's it solving? It needs to solve something. That's what you need to build your brand on. That's what you need to build this industry on. Build an industry with integrity based on science and social needs. And everything will be fantastic. we can go back to the use the way it's supposed to be done. Thank you.